Hello, government students. Today we are going to introduce the executive branch, specifically the presidency. I like starting off with this picture here because it shows a photograph of a very exclusive club. This is 4 of the 5 living ex-presidents that you see in this photograph. On the far left, you see President Carter. Then we have President Clinton, President Obama, and President George W. Bush, 4 of the 5 living ex-presidents. The one, of course, who is missing is President Trump. I doubt if we'll ever see a photograph of President Trump with these 4 other men. If we do, they won't look quite so jovial and happy because I don't know how well you follow the situation, but President Trump has voiced disdain for his predecessors, and his predecessors, I don't think, want to have much to do with President Trump either. With that being said, though, let's get into it. I want to start off by looking at the presidential qualifications, okay? The qualifications to be president are specified in Article 2 of the Constitution. And so in order to become president, you must meet certain criteria. First of all, you must be a natural-born citizen of the United States. What does that mean? Well, what I know it doesn't mean is that it doesn't mean that you could become president if you had been born overseas and became a naturalized citizen of the United States. That is, if you were born a citizen of a different country, and you were born in another country, and then you moved to the United States later and then became naturalized through that process where you can become a U.S. citizen, you would not be eligible to be president. You must be natural born. So there's no firm definition of what that means, but what we definitely know it means is that if you were born in the United States, you are a natural born citizen of the United States and would be eligible to become president. If you were born overseas, but one or both of your parents were U.S. citizens, you would be probably considered a natural-born citizen as well. Even though you were born overseas, if both of your parents were overseas temporarily, traveling or on a job or something of that nature, you would be considered a natural-born citizen in that case as well. You must be 35 years old, so the age requirement is a little bit stricter than it is to serve in the Congress. And you must have lived in the United States for 14 years. So if you were born in the United States, but then you moved away as a child, unless you've lived in the United States for 14 years, you would not be able to run for president, even though you might have been a natural-born citizen. Now, we have had one president who barely met that criteria. John Quincy Adams, who was elected in 1824, was sent to study abroad by his parents when he was just a boy, actually. I believe he studied in France and I believe in Russia for a while. And as an adult, as a young adult, he served overseas as a United States diplomat. He was the ambassador to several European countries. And he really, when he became president, had only lived in the United States, I don't know, probably 20 years or less, more than 14, obviously, but not that much. The term of office to be president is 4 years for a single term. And there is a maximum of 10 years that you can be president. So you can run for re-election, of course, and serve again. But you cannot serve more than 10 years. Now that's kind of odd, you may be thinking. 4 years, well, if you run twice, that's 8 years. Well, the way this works is, let's say you are vice president and the president dies. The president that you're serving as vice president should die while in office. Well, if that president has served more than half of his term before he dies, then you become president. You could conceivably run and be elected twice and still serve 10 years or less. On the other hand, if the president dies before he has served a full half of his term, then you would only be able to run for re-election one time, a maximum of 10 years. There used to not be a term limit at all. That term limit was created by the 22nd Amendment in 1947. And it was created because of the man sitting there in this picture on the right. That's President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the only president that we have ever had in our nation's history who served more than 2 terms. And he was actually elected to 4 terms. First during the Great Depression, and then as World War II was raging in Europe before America entered it, but it was raging in Europe. The American people decided to give him an unprecedented 3rd term. And then, while we were still fighting World War II in 1944, he was elected for a 4th term. However, in that 4th term, he only was able to serve about 1 month of it, and then he passed away, and the man on the left then became president when Roosevelt passed away just 1 month into his 4th term, and that is here President Harry Truman. And it was felt after Roosevelt died that he was probably in the office longer than we need a single man to be president. And so it was determined that we should have a limit to how long one can serve in the presidency, and that is now 10 years. Let's talk a little bit about presidential succession. The first vice president to become president was John Tyler. He was elected vice president with President William Henry Harrison in the election of 1840. When Harrison took the oath of office in 1841, it was a cold, blustery, wet, rainy day. President Harrison was not wearing a hat, and he was not wearing a warm overcoat, and he caught a cold. Well, that cold turned into pneumonia, and after just 30 full days in office, he died. And John Tyler was then the first person to succeed to the presidency on the death of his predecessor. So the order of succession then is obviously vice president comes first. That's followed by the Speaker of the House, then the President pro tempore of the Senate. Then we go into cabinet members, and we have the Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of Defense, and the Attorney General in that order. So obviously we've never had anyone beyond the vice president succeed to the presidency, but if there were a terrible disaster, then this is the way it would shake out. And if we were to go beyond the Attorney General, it's basically determined based on when the cabinet department was created. So, Secretary of State's in charge of the Department of State, et cetera, et cetera. The Attorney General is in charge of the Justice Department. Then we go to those other departments like the Department of the Interior, the Department of Commerce, those types of things. There's 15 cabinet secretaries, and there's then several other high-ranking positions that aren't officially, a cabinet department, but they're also in that line of succession. Okay, let's talk about a little bit of presidential trivia. This isn't anything you need to have in your notes, but I think it's kind of interesting stuff. Some trivia about our 46 presidents. Of the 46 presidents that we've had, 16 have been elected to 2 terms, so more often than not, you're only going to serve 1 term. One president was elected to more than 2 terms, and of course I just mentioned him. That was President Roosevelt, who was elected to 4 terms. He actually served 3 full terms in 1 month of his 4th. The shortest presidency was the one I just mentioned, 30 full days, and that was William Henry Harrison, who died of pneumonia after taking the oath of office. 8 presidents have died in office, and of those 8, 4 were assassinated. So 4 presidents died from natural causes while serving, and 4 were assassinated or murdered while in office. Interesting, the first one, William Henry Harrison, was elected in 1840. The next to die in office was Lincoln, who was elected in 1860. The next to die in office was William Garfield, elected in 1880. The next to die in office was William McKinley, elected in the year 2000. The next to die was Warren G. Harding, elected in 1920. The next to die was Franklin Roosevelt, elected in 1940. The next to die was John F. Kennedy, elected in 1960. Notice that those 8 all were elected in years that end in a 0. We went on a string where every president who was elected in a year ending in a 0 died in office. And the man who finally broke that string was President Reagan, who was elected in 1980, and he lived out his full term. And then, of course, the next was George W. Bush in 2000. He also lived out his full term. But isn't that an odd thing that every president from 1840 to 1960 who was elected in a year ending in zero died in office? President Reagan, by the way, almost died in office because he too was shot by someone who would have been a would-be assassin. But Reagan survived that gunshot. Had he been shot 100 years earlier, he probably would have died from that wound. One president resigned before his term was over, and that was President Nixon, due to the Watergate scandal. He was going to be impeached and almost certainly convicted. So rather than have that humiliation, he went ahead and resigned, knowing that he would likely be kicked out of office through impeachment. 3 vice presidents succeeded to the presidency and then later won re-election on their own. So 8 presidents died in office. One then resigned. So there have been 9 total vice presidents who succeeded to the presidency. Only 3 of those were able to later win re-election on their own. One president finished his term as an invalid, which means that he was unable to walk, he was unable to speak, he could not even sign his name on a piece of paper. That is because Woodrow Wilson, late in his presidency, suffered a massive stroke. It nearly killed him, and he was pretty much just barely beyond a vegetative state through the last close to a year of his presidency. One president had to use a wheelchair, and that was President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who suffered from polio when he was almost a middle-aged, roughly middle-aged man in the 1920s, and was confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. One president was never elected president or vice president. He became president, but he was never elected. That was Gerald Ford. Under Nixon, Nixon's first vice president was a man by the name of Spiro Agnew. And Agnew had to resign the office. He was involved in some scandal, and he resigned the office of vice presidency. And when the vice president's office became vacant, it allows Congress to appoint a successor vice president, and that was Gerald Ford. So he was actually never elected vice president or president. And then when President Nixon resigned, Gerald Ford became president. One president was also a member of the Confederate government during the Civil War. John Tyler, the first vice president to become president, was from the South, and when the South seceded, he put his lot in with the Confederacy and served in the Confederate Congress. One president was also the Chief Justice of the United States, and that was William Howard Taft. After he was through being president, he was later appointed Chief Justice. One president is rumored to have been homosexual, and that is James Buchanan, the man who preceded Abraham Lincoln. He was a bachelor, and he lived with another man in the White House, and there were those rumors that that was a homosexual relationship. Never been confirmed. The youngest person to be elected president was, ta-da, John F. Kennedy. He was 43 years old when he became president. However, Kennedy was not the youngest president. He's just the youngest to be elected president. The youngest president was Theodore Roosevelt, who became president at the age of 42 when his predecessor, William McKinley, was assassinated. And the oldest president, Joe Biden, elected when he was 77 years old, and he was 78 when he took the oath of office. And President Trump was the second oldest. He was 74 when he became president. Okay, presidential elections every 4 years on leap years. Those are those years when February gets that extra day. They're chosen by the Electoral College. Electors represent each state, and the number of electors that each state gets is equal to the total number of senators and representatives for that state. And then the District of Columbia has 3 electors. So let's think about this. There are 435 members of the House of Representatives. There are 100 senators. 435 plus 100 equals 535. Then you add 3 for the District of Columbia, and that gets you to 538 total presidential electors. And these guys, these electors, are party activists, and when there's a presidential election, what happens is people go vote, and whoever gets the most votes for a particular state will get that state's presidential electors. And I think, yes, I was almost going to stop prematurely. Again, it's a winner take all for most states. So you could win the popular vote by just one vote and you get all of that state's electors. And I'm going to stop here. We'll talk about the Electoral College tomorrow.